First of all, thank you for allowing me to speak with you guys today. We did a survey and sent it out there. And of the 10 different topics that were recommended, these were the top two. And that was tool sets and design review using studio sessions. Just a brief introduction. That's my name, phone number, and email address if you have any questions for me after today's session. I do have a Bluebeam specific YouTube channel. I generally post a new video about once every 2 weeks. So for today, I'm going to focus on design review tools, and these are the things that I think are in Bluebeam that are of the most value when it comes to design review, and they're just often overlooked, and that is the use of color, the use of named layers, the use of tool sets, captured media, custom columns, and studio sessions. And I'm going to walk through each one of those as we move forward. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to get out of presentation mode. And what I've got is I've got my PowerPoint on the right-hand side as a PDF, and on the left-hand side I've got just an empty 8.5 by 11 document. So let's talk about the power of color when it relates to working with design review and markups. If you establish a standard that simply says everybody who works on this project together, the people from Department A are going to use red, and the people from Department B are going to use blue, and the people from Department whatever are going to use green. That simplifies everything so that when you're looking at a document and you see color, then you're able to just instantly know that that markup came from the architect or that markup came from the structural engineer, just simply through the use of color. But having people place their markups, I'll just place one in here. I'll grab this cloud and place that in there. Having people do that and then go in here and set that as a default and trying to remember that and do all those sorts of things is just not convenient. And if you want to use named layers, which I think are incredibly important, is to be able to have layers to turn different groupings of markups on and off conveniently. You can't do that with set default. It completely ignores the application of layers. You also cannot grab an existing markup and right click on it and use Format Painter to copy its properties and apply it to another markup and have that also understand and apply layer assignment information. It simply doesn't do it. So you really need to use tool sets if you're going to be using the powerful benefits of named layers within Bluebeam for your design reviews. And the way you go about that is you create the markup exactly the way you want it. You make sure that before you put it into your tool set, you'll give it a layer assignment, and then when you add it to your tool set, now it will remember all of the properties, but more importantly, it'll remember the layer name as well. If I come over here and I open up some of these tool sets, now these are multiple tool sets for an agency that I'm working with right now, and this is how they're doing their design review. Every department has been assigned a color. Every department has been assigned a layer name. Every markup within that tool set has been created with that layer name as part of the enforcement of the documents that are there. And here's the additional of that when you have a tool set set up properly like that, is if I go look at the layers in this particular document, it had no layers in it whatsoever. That layer called construction review got generated automatically by simply placing a markup from one of the tool sets that has been established with markups that are on properly named layers. So if I come down here to roadway and I place a green cloud for roadway, not only did it do it and enforce the colors appropriately based on our agreed to standard, if I go look at the layers, it automatically created the necessary layer needed called roadway review and then placed that markup upon that layer just the way it's supposed to. So tool sets combined with markups that are on specifically named layers will auto-generate the necessary layers when you're working locally. Like this one here, if I go down to survey and place another cloud and then go look at layers, it created the survey one as well. Now that is something that does not happen when we go to studio sessions, and we're going to be doing that in just a little while. If you've got a library of pre-created symbology like this, and you're anticipating that the markups that you place using those libraries will go in looking exactly the same, but equally important, being on the right layers. In a studio session, it can't recreate the layer for you. The layer name must pre-exist before you get there. And I'll be talking about that in just a minute as we move on to studio sessions. The other things that are beneficial, and I'm just doing a cursory level, I'm going to come back in more detail here, is the use of captured media. I don't think enough people take advantage of that particular capability. Now, I'm going to show you an example of something that's becoming more and more popular, and I learned of this in a conversation with Scott Thompson. Anyway, he had created a tool set like this for use in field applications when they were using review on an iPad. And what they're doing is going out to the field, and when they find a particular problem, they're taking a photograph of it. But rather than just paste the image in there, I'm going to open up a file here. I'll do a file from a template, and I'll just choose let's just do a floor plan, an architectural floor plan. So if they're out there and they're looking at something that's going on in this particular area and they take a photograph of it, what they're using is a symbol like this to simply say that the camera for this photograph, I was standing roughly there looking in that direction, and then from there they'll right click on that and do captured media, and either and on the iPad, it's very simple. They can just simply say from the camera, automatically take a picture, automatically have it attached. It's actually easier to do on an iPad than it is on a desktop, which is what I'm using right now. But now I can choose from the camera or from the file, and if I choose the camera, then it will give me the option even on the desktop of either using a still photograph or video, or if you're using a 360-degree camera, then you could do that as well. And I've got a different symbol when I'm using a 360-degree camera, so that when I attach a 360-degree photograph, you can just see the rough area of where I'm standing. Now, I don't know if any of you are using that yet, but it's definitely becoming something that I see more and more frequently. So it's something to keep in mind as far as creating a library of those directional pointers, and not just for photographs, as people start to do more and more of these point clouds and scanned surveys, and then taking that information and making it accessible from within the PDF file. That's something that we're seeing more and more of as well. Also in this summary are a list of custom columns. Now, down at the bottom of my markup list, for this particular profile, I'm going to hop out of here and go back to my empty document. For this agency, these are the standards that they've got for all of their custom columns. So if you come in here and you're a drainage person and you draw a markup, what you'll do is you'll simply double click there and you'll choose drainage, and it already knows if this was a 163 page document, it would already know that you drew that markup on page 14 or page 33. That's just extracting the page index information. And then they've got a series of typed in comments here. I'll just put in T-Klein. And then last comment I'll put in here is needs attention. Now they've got a system that has a 4-digit code as to the initial and final disposition. And the person who placed that comment would go in there and say that, okay, this is a disposition of A, B, C, or D, and then that would be the end of their responsibility. Following reviewing part of this activity, that person would come in, they would not create a new markup, they would simply right-click on that and do a reply. And their reply would start from where the initial person left off. So they would come back in and say, okay, well, the final disposition of this is C because I did these things. Let's just do comments addressed by TPC. They can add additional comments. There's a series of pull downs that go along with that. Who did the QC? The beauty of that information is that replaces the manual task that I've seen for 40 years where people were taking paper drawings and marking them up with colored pencils. But then right beside that, they had a sheet of paper where they would keep an index of all of the markups that were on there. Markup number 1 had this thing and it was done by this person. Just everything was manual. Now you can do it inside of the document, and that's what this agency does. And when they're ready, they simply do a export to a comma separated file. And what that does is that dumps the information, and then they take that and they just paste it into a pre-formatted Excel spreadsheet. And that report of who said what when and what was the markups and all of that information is automatically being extracted from a single source of truth, and in this case coming from a PDF file with all the markups and the custom columns down at the bottom. Now, here's the beauty of that. If I'm working alone, that's great. But if I'm working in the cloud, and in the cloud I've got the ability to do all of that, and so do you. You've got the ability in the cloud to mark up the same file that I'm marking up at the same time, and you've got access to all of these tool sets that have these pre-standardized symbologies with specific layer name assignments, and all of that works. All right, now you've got a really good design review workflow. So a few more things about tool sets before we jump into studio sessions. I want to make sure that you understand exactly what tool sets are and some of the values of it. Tool sets are libraries of reusable standardized markup symbols. You've seen that. They hold both created and captured markups. What I mean by that is that if I come in here and draw a markup of any kind, I can right click on it and I can say add to a tool chest and do so, and it will add it in there. That's a created markup, as opposed to if I come in here and I grab an architectural floor plan or something like that and I do edit and I do snapshot and I grab a copy of that and I paste it into the file. Now that to me is a captured markup, but that can also be added to a tool chest. So you can steal from your drawings graphics that you think would be helpful to have in a reusable way, and then you can do those as well. Also in this tool set is the ability to take I'm going to paste this one into here. I'm going to grab that one and I'm going to say add that to a tool set, and I'm going to use real estate. Now I've got a graphic there. Now that, if I place it 15 times into the drawing, it's just there, but no one is keeping count of it. In a tool set, you can take any of these markups that you've created and you can right click on it and you can say create a count version of that has that information associated with it. Now when I take that and I place it into a drawing, not only does it do it, down at the bottom in the markups list, it keeps a quantity count of all of those so that you'll know that there's 4 or 5 or 15 or 50 spread on a single page or throughout a document. And in fact, if you go in and you use a dynamic legend that's associated with your tool set and you're using those count markups, the two combine together so that you can have a dynamic legend that keeps track of all those things and displays it in a very presentable way as well. There are, for those of you who haven't worked a lot with tool sets, there are different ways of placing symbols that are in there. What you're seeing right now is called properties mode, which means if I choose this cloud and I place it, I can place something similar to the way it was originally created. So it matches the layer, it matches the color, it matches all the properties. But if I double click on it, that toggles it into drawing mode, in which case I can place an exact copy of what that markup was originally created at. Not just similar, but an exact copy of it. Two different ways of placing the same markup from a tool set. You just double click on it. Or you can right click on it and you can change it from drawing mode to properties mode or back just using the menu there. There's also two different ways of displaying your entire library by going into this gear symbol here, the settings, and you can change it from symbol display to detail display, and now you can see not only the symbol, but you can see the subject name that's associated with that particular symbol. Like this one here, environmental review. That's incorrect. That should say drainage review. Now I've changed that and it's corrected and it's easier for me to see. If I go back to symbol mode, it's still there. And if I hover, now I'll see that it's been corrected. But those are two different ways of displaying the content of a tool set. These tool sets that you're creating, anything you do inside of there can be saved. I'll save that change. And it can also be exported. And if you export a tool set, it creates a file called a BTX file. That's a Bluebeam Toolset Exchange file format. And that you can give to anybody, and they can double click on it, and it will automatically import it and set it up on their particular use of Bluebeam. And that works perfectly well with the iPad, both review and view products. You can also, what I do to distribute those most often is I simply go to attach. Right here, I'll go to File, Attach. I'll choose my BTX file, and I'll just embed it into a PDF file that I'm sharing with somebody in a studio session or through some other activity, and then all they have to do is double click on that and it will automatically import it and set it up as one of their usable tool sets inside of their use of Bluebeam as well. And if you don't need it anymore, it's like any other markup. You can click on it and just delete it. My recommendations here are, when you're using tool sets and you're creating these markups, is to create good subjects. All right? It doesn't do you any good to create a library of junk. So when you are creating these libraries, like right here, snapshot. Well, snapshot doesn't do me any good at all. Count measurement, that doesn't do me any good at all. So if I come down here and I say that this is an exit sign, that is something that's more usable, and more importantly, when I'm looking down in the markup list, and so are the rest of my project participants, when I display the subject and I see that down in the markup list, now I'm seeing information that's of more use to me than simply, hey, somebody snapshotted something. So make sure that you use good subjects when you're creating these libraries. You may have seen the ability to have a subject and comment, and then there's this third column called label, and you can't really do anything with that. If you double click on there and you tell it, hey, I want to change that, or I want to change that, that works fine. But when you go to label and you double click, it doesn't do anything. That's because labels are only relevant to count markups, like this one at the bottom here. If I go to a count markup, now I can create a label here that is helpful and informative and also related to a count markup. And by the way, if you're using custom columns, and those columns keep track of quantities of specific items and dollar values and labor rates and those types of things, you can have your markup symbol tied to your custom column through the use of a good label associated with that particular markup. We could spend an entire hour on just that subject, but that is the value and the importance of tool sets. We're going to move on to a studio session, but I want to talk about what doesn't work in a studio session if you don't set it up properly before you get there. I'm going to hop out of this file here. These custom columns, in order for this to be available and usable by everybody in our studio session, they have to pre-exist in the documents that get uploaded to the studio session so that they're there and available and usable. Because once you're in the studio session, you can change the content of what's in here, but you can't change the structure of the custom columns themselves. Also, if you're using a series of symbols, symbol libraries like tool sets that have layer name assignments on them, in the studio session, it will not automatically recreate a layer. Like utilities right now, I haven't placed any utility symbols. So in this file, there is no layer called utilities. If I were to upload this document to a studio session and try to have people work with me, we wouldn't be able to place, we'd be able to place symbols from the utilities library and it would look okay, but none of them would actually be going to a layer called utilities review, which is what we want. So those layer names need to exist before you take your file up to a studio session. Now that can be as simple as going into each of those and placing an object. I don't need that one. Let's take traffic, and we'll do survey, and we'll do standards, and we'll do here, I didn't actually do standards. We'll grab that one. All right. So now I've got all those things in there. If I grab all of that stuff and delete it, if I go look at the layers, it created the layers that were necessary. And even though the markups got deleted, the layer names don't. So now I've got an empty file that I could take to the studio session, and the layers I need would already be there, and then tool sets, the layer assignments, the colors, everything would work properly because everything has been set up properly before you get there. Now, sitting there and doing that manually would be a lot of work. And if you have the Extreme edition, that can be greatly simplified with just like a 2-line script that says, I want to take this document and I want to create the layer names I need and the custom columns I need before I take this file to the studio session. And then any file you open, before you go to a studio session with it, you simply run that script. It takes care of everything, and then you're ready to take it up into the cloud and collaborate on it. Now, unfortunately, in order to execute a script, you have to have the Bluebeam Review Extreme Edition to do that. But if you do, that is a tremendous help as far as prepping your documents and then taking them up there. And on my YouTube channel, there is about a 7-minute video up there on creating and using a script to do just that sort of thing. So you're welcome to go and check that out. There's also an hour-long presentation to the Omaha Bluebeam user group on purely layer management, and I'd invite you to go look at that as well. Let's take this file that we've got, and in fact I'm going to undo the deletion of that because there's something else I want you to see in a studio session. And I'm going to save this file. I'll just do a save as. I'll go to my desktop right here, and I will put atxbug.pdf, and now I'm going to go to Studio, and I'm already logged in, but I'm going to log out so that you can see the process. If you've never been in Studio at all, you will need what is called a BBID. If you don't have one, when you go here, you go to Create Account, and you just answer those questions. You'll get an email asking you to confirm and validate that you really do want a BBID, and then you'll receive it and be able to use it from that point forward. I've got mine, so I'll key in my password. And the reason it logged me in automatically is because I turned that on, and then every time I launch, oh, that's not my password. And then every time I launch Bluebeam and go into Studio, I don't have to key in my password anymore. It just streamlines the process. Now, there are two completely different things in Studio. There are Studio Projects, which is cloud-based document storage, revision control, that type of thing. And then there's Studio Sessions, and that is like a virtual conference room in the cloud where you can have up to 500 people simultaneously working on as few as a single PDF. I mean, that's really been the goal from the day I started into the AEC industry back in 1980, was to have everybody working on the same document at the same time. That was the goal. I spent 6 years working at Bentley Systems, who makes MicroStation, the main competitor to AutoCAD in the design industry. And the entire time I was there, the goal was to be able to work in the same file at the exact same time. This actually allows you to do that. It allows up to 500 people at one time to be in the exact same file. So here I've got I don't have a session active at this point, so I want to create one. I want to open a conference room. So I'm going to say, let's create a new session. All I have to do is give it a name. I'm going to put atxbug, and I've got a file open. So I'm going to say add the open files, and I'm going to take away the PowerPoint because I really just want that mocked up drawing up there. Now all I have to do is look at the permissions. I'm going to allow anybody who joins this session the ability to take that file and save it locally, print it, mark it up, to take an existing markup and notify another project participant about its existence because they think it's important. I'm going to choose to allow them to add their own documents or not. It's simply a checkbox that I would choose here. This is the most important button on the entire studio session setup dialog box to me is, do you want to restrict attendees by email addresses? In essence, do you only want to allow invited people to come into your studio session? And 99% of the time, that's going to be turned on. I'm going to turn it off. So as soon as this thing is created and that file is uploaded, you'll be able to join me if you already have sessions going, and you'll be able to mark this thing up. And I invite you to do that. Have some fun with it. And the last thing here is to decide, as you're creating your session, does it have a ticking time clock? Does it have a predetermined, we're going to end at this moment in time deadline? And then if so, what day and what time is that? And when that happens, if you turn that on, when it reaches December the 10th at 5 p.m., it'll simply shut the session down. It doesn't delete it. It doesn't implode. All it does is log everybody out, and the only person who can get back into it is the host who created it. And then they can decide if they want to extend their deadline or not. Now I'm going to hit OK. That was perfect timing, Angela. So I just hit OK now that I've made all my choices, and it has now created a brand new session. And that number, it always assigns a 9-digit number, and the 9-digit number for this one is 4019142244. Now, I chose not to restrict it by email, but I can still proactively invite people by either going to my address book, going to a list of known email addresses and groups, or simply typing in email addresses here. So if I wanted to put, terry.klein@georgia.com, whatever it may be, I can just start typing it in. If instead I've got a list of emails, and whether that's in I'm going to open this up. This happens to be a text document with just a few emails inside of it. But this could just as easily be a spreadsheet with a bunch of titles and physical addresses and just all sorts of information in there. I can cut and paste that. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back to here and I'm going to paste that in. Even if it had a bunch of superfluous junk in there, when I go to the right-hand corner and I say check and include emails, it'll filter out all of that un-email related information and just boil it down to, okay, I found these legitimate email addresses. Are these the people you want to invite? And I could choose, oh yeah, I didn't mean to include Joey, and oh, I forgot to include. And so you can do that and then just invite your participants, and they'll each get an email saying, hey, Terry's inviting you to come in and work with him on this particular thing. And all they have to do is click on that and they'll be able to join it. You can see right here, a copy of my drawing has been uploaded to the cloud, but it also still exists on my local machine. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right there to open up the cloud version of my document. And you can see where somebody has already gone in there and added their own markup. Well, if I go and click on it, it'll tell me down here if I include, I'll go to the markup list columns and I'll include author so I can see who did that. And now I can come down here and look at author, and I can see that Aaron is the person who placed that particular markup inside of the file. Now that's also important to note a couple of things. I'm going to, now that we're in the cloud, I'm going to go over to here and I'm going to look at the layers. All right, those are the layers that got created before we uploaded this file. And one of them that's missing is environmental. All right, I'm going to use that as an example. But first I'm going to grab standards and I'm going to place a new cloud called standards. All right, now if I click on that and I right click and I go look at layers, it was created, and it was created properly, and it was placed on the standards review named layer because the tool set was set up that way, and because the PDF file contained a layer called standards review before it was uploaded to the cloud. Now, if we compare that and we go to environmental, which wasn't set up properly, and if I come in here and I choose that and I place an environmental cloud, it looks fine. But when I click on it and I go to property, I just right click and I go into layer, we can see, now wait a minute, did I have environmental in there? Let's see, consultant. Oh, sorry. I lost my own place. Now here, I'm working on my local copy of that file. You can see where it says C, users, Walter, and so on. Over here, This is the cloud-based version of that. I'm going to drag them over here so that they're sitting sort of right side by side. All right, and I'll just do a Control-1 and split that screen in half. All right. So now you can see those two. So I'm going to go to the cloud, and I'm going to do that again. I'm going to place a standard markup here. And if I right-click, choose it, and right-click on it and go to layer, it worked just fine. But now if I go to the environmental one, and I choose it, and I place it here, and I right-click on it, and I go look at layer, which is on the other screen right now. Let me slide that over so you can see it. If I go down to layer, see, it created that markup, and it's green, and everything about it is perfect except the layer assignment. That's because when I uploaded this file to the studio session, it didn't have a layer called environmental, even though it really needed one. And as a result, I have done this in a way that was not what I needed, and therefore I'm making life hard on myself. So it's really important if you're going to use named layers, which I highly recommend, that you have an established flow to make sure that when you get to the studio session, what you need is there and ready to go. Other things that are super important about studio sessions, I've got about roughly 7 or 8 more minutes, that I think are super important and beneficial in a studio session. There's a couple of things I want you to note about the markups in this cloud-based one. I drew that purple markup. You know, it's right here in the original document. All right, I can delete it, I can do whatever I want to with it. But when I took it to the cloud, any markup that pre-existed in the file before you go to your studio session, even if you created it yourself, like this purple cloud right here, once you're in the studio session, you cannot do anything with it. I mean, it knows I created that cloud. Even still, I can't right-click on it and delete it or anything like that. You can only manipulate your markups that you yourself placed after you got to the studio session. Like this red cloud, I drew that one, but I drew it after we got there. That one now I have full control over. Now, Aaron drew this hey bug markup up here, and if I click on that one, we can see that it's all of the handles on it are grayed out as well. And if I right click on it, I can't do anything really with it either. I can't delete it, I can't move it, I really can't manipulate it in any way. There are some things I can do that are really important. The first of which, for like this agency at the bottom with these custom columns down there, the first of which is in a studio session, I can still choose someone else's markup and I can reply to it. And in that reply, then I can do what I'm expected to do, which is to go in here and choose the final disposition, to put in whatever comments I think are important, you know, hey back, and do all of the things that are necessary for me to do, even though I'm doing it on someone else's markups. The other things you can do to someone else's markups is you can change the status. Now in this drawing, I've only got some standard statuses, but you can create custom statuses. And again, we could spend an entire hour on nothing but using and applying and taking advantage of the status markup column. But you can also, and this is an important one, if I go back to the studio session and I look at who has joined this studio session, I can see a list of names of people who have been here, including Brett and Ash and Aaron, and I'm not sure who else that is, but there's a whole bunch of people in there. I can choose any markup, like Aaron's markup, and I think it's super important for Brett to know about that. I can right-click on that and say Alert Attendee, and I can go choose, and it'll give me a list of everybody who is or has attended this session in the past, and I can identify one or more of them and hit OK. Brett is going to receive an email saying that Terry Klein from this file in this studio session thinks it's important for you to know about this particular markup that was done by Aaron. And then in that email will be a hyperlink that Brett can just click on to automatically take him into review, ask him to log in if he doesn't have the keep me logged in thing turned on, and take him directly to that session, that file, that markup. And that's a great feature of Studio Sessions, if you haven't done it, is to take advantage of the alert attendee capability. Now, if Brett chooses to ignore my email, that's fine. Eventually, he'll come back to this session, and as soon as he logs in, he'll see under this notification section of the audit trail of a studio session, it will start flashing orange, and it will get his attention saying, hey, Terry Klein alerted you to this markup in this file, and give them again, they'd be able to just click on that and it would take me straight to that particular markup within that particular file. All right, I'm going to return to my PowerPoint to see if there's anything I haven't covered that I wanted to, and then I'll wrap this up. These are the rules about studio sessions. Yes, do we have any questions? Oh, that's interesting. I have never tried that before. Let's do it. This one here, I know I created before we brought it up there. I know I can't do anything with it, but if I right click on it, you're right. Alert has gone away. That is, yeah, I had never thought to even try that, but yeah, you're right. If it's one that pre-existed before it was brought up, yeah. Now, what I would do if I wanted to draw someone's attention to that is I would go in and I would choose my I don't know, maybe just a point here and a point right there, and I would put in some text, and then I'd put right here, hey Brett, pay attention to this, and then that I would use the alert on, because that's something that that I placed after we were up there. But yeah, you're right. You can't do it with one that pre-existed. I had not experimented with that before. Okay, so as far as the rules, Studio Sessions is a virtual conference room in the cloud. It is limited to PDF files only, but you can upload into a single session up to 5,000 PDF files, and each one can be up to 1 gigabyte in size. So there's a huge amount of storage that you can put up there. You can have up to 500 people participating at the same time. You can invite thousands of people, but only 500 of them can be active at one single time. It can be open to anyone, limited to invited guests. It can have a preset deadline or not. You can do permissions. The permissions that I applied to my studio session, I could have done it initially, or I can always come back and edit those sessions, and I can go to permissions. Right now, I've got all of my rules based on everybody. But if I add an attendee's email address, like Brett, I'll take Brett specifically. These are the rules for everybody but Brett. And now I'm going to take Brett, and I'm going to say that, you know what, Brett is allowed to do markups, all right, but Brett is not allowed to do alerts. And I'll apply that. So now I've got individual person-specific privileges that are tied through the settings of the session that was there. It allows for simultaneous commenting, and when I say consecutive commenting, that means that you can leave the session, it'll still keep running, you can come back later on and add additional comments, and you can come and go as you please. You can even work offline with a studio session. That'll be the last thing I show you live, and then we'll wrap this up. Right here, I'm in this session, and I'm going to close down the local file. And I'm in the cloud working on this document, and I know I'm about to go to the field, and I know I will have 0 internet capability. So what I can do, if that is a situation I find myself in, is instead of leaving the session, I can come right above that where there's a connected status, and I can click on that and say, I want to work offline. And I'll say yes. All right. I am now offline from the studio session. I am obviously on the internet, or you wouldn't hear me and this Zoom would have died. But let's say I wasn't. I can now take this computer and go to the field, and while I'm out there, I can still mark it up. I could come in here and draw markups, I could take photographs, I could do all sorts of things. And whatever I'm doing, you'll see a little indicator there while you're offline, that is pending. No one else on the project can see what I'm doing while I'm offline. But the minute I have internet access again and I come and I re-log in and I reconnect to the studio session, it'll automatically take everything I did while I was offline and upload it to the cloud, and it'll also update in my display anything that anybody else did while I was offline. So it's a great tool to use if you find yourself heading out and you know you're going to be disconnected, but you still need access to a shared set of documents while you're out there, and it works just as well on the iPad version. Any other rules that are there? There is an audit trail of who did what when. There's a chat feature inside of there, and importantly is two things of real importance is it works with 3D PDFs. You can certainly view and mark up 3D PDFs. And the people participating in your session, they need Bluebeam, but they don't need a registered license of Bluebeam. They can use the trial version, or they can use a copy of the trial version that has timed out and gone automatically into that view-only mode. And while somebody using an unlicensed seat of Bluebeam is actively joined and participating in a studio session, they temporarily inherit markup capabilities even though they haven't actually paid for a license of Bluebeam. So if you're working with project participants who complain that, oh, well, I'd love to, be part of your team, but I can't afford X amount of seats of Bluebeam, if they're going to be joining your sessions only to mark up, they don't need a registered license. They just need a copy to be able to join and participate.